just because we're the best at doing something right now doesn't mean we can't improve.
Sure.
So that's where I am on that.
Well, you have generations of people in this country who have grown up with the ideas of their parents and they of their parents and so on and so forth back. And you've got all of those years of mind changing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's more likely that the people reflect their parents' thinking, the earliest experiences that they have. And are we going to, where are we going to get to the point where we no longer perpetuate the worst in ourselves and start perpetuating the best in ourselves?
I think it's.
Or do you have an answer to
no,
that?
I don't know if we ever will. I think we're looking for the wrong thing. There are some people out there that want all people of all races, and I'm exaggerating, of course, but to get in a big circle around the country, hold hands and sing Kumbaya, that's never going to happen. Don't worry about that. It doesn't have to happen.
Yeah.
Just has to have mutual respect for everyone that's within our American or our world community. If we can do that, say, look, these are the rules. These are the things that these are the goals you must attain in order to get from point A to point B. History tells us that when African Americans, Asians, Hispanics, any groups of color are given the rules of whatever game is being played, they do well. Yeah. I mean, we use a sports analogy. Tiger Woods came into golf, took golf over. And he's every race you can imagine. That's what he claims. Yeah. Baseball, hockey. If enough black people are interested in hockey one day, hockey will be dominated by African Americans too. But it's just, the whole thing is part of having rules. I'm a big fan of standardized tests as a teacher, and a lot of my colleagues just jump all over me for that. Because what I found out is, with standardized tests, 65th percentile or 95th percentile is that percentile regardless of what race you are. Yeah. If you picked A and the answer is A, they can't take that away from you. Yeah. So that's why I like standardized tests, because we have standards, and the nepotism goes out the window. The family connections go out the window. If we teach kids about the elements that are necessary for success on a test, and they master those elements, no matter what neighborhood they come from, no matter what race they come from, if they do well on it, they get the prize. Yeah. That's why I'm a big fan of standards. I'm a big fan of level playing fields. And a lot of times we don't want that, because as educators, I think we don't want to do what it takes to bring other people up to that level. Yes, if you spent years and generations of being behind educationally, it's going to take a little more time to get everybody up to that level. But that's our job. And once we get them there, then we can say, okay, you know what he knows. Take the test, and may the best man win. And if we're doing that in every aspect of our society, I think the race becomes less and less of a factor. I mean, we're seeing that now in terms of class. I think our bigger problem now is a class problem, not a race problem. Because what we know is everybody respects the color green. We know that if O.J. Simpson was Ron Simpson over from 55th Street and Kobe Bryant was Michael Bryant from around the way, they'd be under the jail by now. Yeah. But because they're who they are and they bring what they bring to the table financially in terms of their star power, I mean, that's what America's all about, and we have to stop acting like that's not the case. Yeah.
Well, it's easier to look to the other way and just ignore the reality of it. But as you mentioned several times, as we were speaking truth and the rules will out. Eugene, let me switch now to, I'd love to keep talking about this, but I want to cover your books a little bit further. Okay. There's another one that I was particularly interested in and was able to get a copy of, called Grounded in the Word, which you did with your father.
Yes.
Have you done other works with your father as well?
No, this was our first work together. Actually, no, I'm not thinking today. We did our first work together was It's a Reading Thing, Help Your Child Understand. And my father and I worked together to put together exercises and resources for parents, primarily low-income parents, who want to find ways to get their kids excited about reading. One thing we do know as educators is kids mimic their parents. If a child sees mom and dad reading a lot, they're going to read. If a child sees mom and dad watching TV all the time, they're going to watch TV all the time. Whatever they see mom and dad do, that's what they'll do.
Exactly.
So, you know, a lot of times too, I mean, going back to the Bill Cosby point just for a second, people who get so mad about that, you know, and they say, oh, why is little Betsy or Johnny doing this or that? Look in the mirror. They're probably doing what they saw you do.
That's exactly right.
Because you're their first connection to the greater society.
Yeah. Well, Grounded in the Word interested me particularly because, well, the subheading is a guide to mastering standardized test vocabulary and biblical comprehension.
Yes.
Which seems like an unusual way, perhaps, of approaching vocabulary.
Sure.
We think of biblical reading as a spiritual experience, but we don't think of it in other ways. Well, it does teach us ways to live and so forth. Mm-hmm. We don't think of it in terms of something that teaches us how we're going to build our vocabulary.
That's right.
But this was an interesting approach to it. And tell me a little bit more about how this came into being.
I can tell you that my father and I were just sitting down one morning several years ago, and we were watching one of those Sunday news shows. And the two major issues in education at the time were bringing religion back into the schools and people not performing well on the verbal portion of the SAT. Those are, especially people of color, those are two major issues in educational circles. So we thought, hey, we're going to go ahead and expose them to the vocabulary found in the King James Version of the Bible, because there are over 500. The 500 most commonly found SAT words, or almost all of them, are located in the King James Version of the Bible. So that was my father's primary motivation for this. My motivation was a little bit different. Having grown up in the church and having attended different types of services, different denominations, been to Catholic services, been to Episcopal services, been to Baptist services, been to the synagogue, been to Jewish services, having seen all of those different services, I said to myself, all of these different religions talk about or use stories or passages from the Bible to explain, you know, certain points in terms of morality and how to relate to one another, what have you, our relationship with the Lord, what have you. But the funny thing about it is, there are times when I have heard one pastor say use one verse out of the Bible, and another pastor use the same verse, and it meant totally different things in the context of their sermon. And I said, well, wait a minute. So basically, it could be a situation where if you have an uneducated congregation, or they're not as familiar with the Bible as the pastor is, a pastor could tell them anything, and they could go for it. So being a person who believes in knowing for yourself and teaching, I say, no, let's go ahead and get the vocabulary down so there'll be no question. Okay? Now, once you have the firm basis of what the vocabulary actually means, then we can get into interpretations. But a lot of times we interpret before we know what the words mean.
Yes.